A mother and son set out for a peaceful fishing trip in 1993, their boat cutting through calm waters on what seemed like an ordinary day. They never returned home, vanishing without a trace and leaving their family in agonizing uncertainty. But 19 years later, investigators receive an anonymous tip that leads them to search someone's garage, and when they pull back a dusty tarp, what they discover makes everyone's blood run cold. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment which part of the world you're watching from, because now I'm going to tell you how all of this happened. Martha Sullivan's laugh carried across Lake Champlain on crisp spring mornings, a sound as familiar to locals as the loons calling at dawn. At 42, her weathered hands still moved with precision, whether administering medication at Cedar Falls Memorial or untangling fishing line at sunrise. Her green fishing jacket, worn and patched at the elbows, had become her trademark around town. "Mom, we're going to be late," Ethan called, loading tackle boxes into their 16-foot aluminum boat. The morning mist hung low over Lake Champlain, transforming the shoreline into a dreamscape of gray silhouettes. Martha emerged from their modest lakeside home, 2 thermoses of coffee in hand, her graying hair tucked under a worn baseball cap. "Hold your horses," she replied, checking her watch. "We've got plenty of time before your ceremony." The security camera at Lakeside Marina captured them at 5:42 that morning, Martha chatting with Ray Hoffman, the elderly dockmaster who leaned on his weathered cane and smiled broadly at her approach. "Think you'll catch the big one this time?" Ray called as they prepared to push off. Martha laughed, adjusting her life vest. "Don't I say that every time? Today feels lucky, though." The footage showed nothing unusual, just Martha and Ethan, engaged in their familiar routine, pushing off into the morning mist that swallowed them whole as they navigated toward their favorite fishing spot. By 7:30 that evening, the high school auditorium buzzed with concern. Principal Margaret Wilson stood at the podium, scanning the crowd for Ethan's familiar face. She delayed the senior awards ceremony by 15 minutes, her secretary making 2 unanswered calls to the Sullivan residence. "Has anyone seen Ethan Sullivan today?" she finally asked the crowd, her voice echoing through the PA system. Tom Sullivan, Martha's younger brother who taught history at the local middle school, felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He slipped out of the auditorium, keys already in hand. The Sullivan home stood dark and quiet when he arrived. Inside he found the kitchen light on, ingredients for dinner laid out but unprepared, chicken thawing in a bowl, vegetables half chopped on the cutting board. Martha's purse hung on its usual hook, but the house felt unnaturally empty. Tom drove to the marina where Ray confirmed the worst. "They never came back," the old man said, concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. "Martha's always back by noon. Always." "Martha's punctual to a fault," Tom told Sheriff Daniel Hayes at 9:18 when he officially reported them missing. They stood in the station's fluorescent glare, Tom's voice tight with worry. She wouldn't miss Ethan's ceremony for anything in this world. The initial search began immediately, 2 patrol boats with spotlights scanning the shoreline, calling the Sullivans' names into the darkness. By dawn, the operation had expanded to include Vermont State Police vessels, a helicopter from the New York side of the lake, and dozens of local volunteers in private boats. 3 days into the search, divers recovered a blue thermos bearing Martha's name floating near Split Rock Point, but dragging operations yielded nothing else. No distress calls had been received. Weather reports showed calm conditions that morning. The boat's emergency locator beacon had never activated. "We're treating this as a probable boating accident," Sheriff Hayes told reporters on day 5, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. "Lake Champlain has deep trenches. Sometimes the lake doesn't give up what it takes." The investigation revealed troubling inconsistencies. Martha had withdrawn $800 from her account the previous day, an unusually large sum for her careful budget. A neighbor reported seeing headlights in the Sullivans' driveway around midnight before they disappeared, though couldn't identify the vehicle. As the first week ended without answers, Tom found himself sitting alone in Martha's kitchen, surrounded by casserole dishes from well-meaning neighbors, and a stack of Ethan's college orientation materials that had arrived that morning. The empty house seemed to breathe with ghosts of conversations now silenced, plans interrupted, lives suspended between presence and absence. "They can't just be gone," he whispered to Martha's empty chair, the first tears finally breaking through his shock. While Tom examines the personal items in Martha's bedroom, he finds something disturbing hidden under the mattress: an envelope containing $5,000 in cash, 3 driver's licenses with Martha's photo but different names, and a map with a route traced to the other side of the country. Tom's hands trembled as he held the envelope, its contents spilled across Martha's bed. The driver's licenses stared back at him, each bearing his sister's face, but with unfamiliar names: Ellen Pierce, Marie Lambert, Susan Dawson. The map showed a highlighted route leading from Vermont to Arizona, with small X's marking stops along the way. Tom collapsed onto the edge of the bed, his mind racing. Had Martha been planning to disappear even before that final fishing trip? 5 years later, Cedar Falls had moved on, but Tom Sullivan hadn't. The annual candlelight vigil at Lakeside Marina drew only 17 people on the 5th anniversary, a stark contrast to the hundreds who had gathered that first year. The flickering lights reflected off the dark water as Tom stood apart from the small group, his face gaunt and weathered beyond his 42 years. Back in his basement later that night, Tom updated the case files meticulously organized in labeled binders. One wall was entirely covered with photos, maps, and timelines, a sprawling investigation board that had consumed the last 5 years of his life. The dusty computer in the corner hummed as he updated the website dedicated to finding Martha and Ethan, though the visitor counter rarely changed these days. 142 leads, Zarif Hayes said the following morning, not bothering to hide his exhaustion. The man was 3 months from retirement, and the Sullivan case had become a weight he was eager to shed. Every single one a dead end, Tom. At some point, you have to accept the most likely explanation. Tom pushed a folder across the desk. "These are 3 witness statements about a dark pickup truck parked near their house that week. Nobody ever tracked down the owner." Hayes didn't open the folder. "We did everything possible." Their weekly meetings had once been productive exchanges. Now they were exercises in mutual frustration. As Tom left the station, he heard an officer whisper, "Here comes Conspiracy Sullivan," followed by muffled laughter. The cost of his obsession surrounded Tom in his sparse apartment. Boxes remained unpacked despite living there for 2 years since the divorce. Sarah had tried to understand, had supported him initially, but eventually delivered an ultimatum. "You're living for the dead, Tom, and it's killing me slowly." In the teacher's lounge at Cedar Falls Middle School, conversation halted awkwardly when Tom entered. His colleagues exchanged glances as he declined their invitation to Friday happy hour with the same excuse he'd used for years: "Need to check out a new lead." That evening, Tom found himself rereading Jack Sullivan's medical report for the 100th time. His brother-in-law's death, ruled a heart attack, had never made sense. Jack had been 45, athletic, with no history of cardiac problems. The coincidence felt impossible. Jack dies unexpectedly. Then 3 years later, Martha and Ethan vanish without a trace. "I never believed it was just a coincidence," Tom told Andrea Nichols, a journalist from the Burlington Free Press who had become interested in the case for a 10th anniversary feature. "Someone wanted the Sullivan family gone." The article prompted a review of Jack's records, revealing his connection to Howard Miller, a mechanic from Plattsburgh who had co-signed a loan for Jack 6 months before his death. When investigators attempted to question Miller, they found him uncooperative and hostile. "He knows something," Tom insisted to Sheriff Leland Morris, who had replaced Hayes. "Miller and Jack had some kind of business together." Martha mentioned it once, but wouldn't elaborate. The years continued their relentless march. In 2008, Tom stood alone at his parents' graves, their deaths only months apart, taking with them any hope they'd ever know what happened to their daughter and grandson. Their passing cemented Tom's status as the last keeper of the Sullivan mystery. Hope flickered briefly in 2011 when a fishing guide reported finding Ethan's waterlogged student ID in a remote cove. The discovery triggered a renewed search, but forensic analysis determined the wallet had been in the water for only a few months, suggesting it had been planted. Then in early 2012, Richard Gaines, a bank inspector conducting an audit of foreclosed properties, made a discovery that would shatter the accepted narrative. In a locked garage behind Howard Miller's recently foreclosed home in Plattsburgh, New York, 60 miles south of Cedar Falls, Gaines found a boat covered by a tarp. Something about the registration number triggered his memory, prompting him to contact authorities. When FBI agents removed the tarp, they found the Sullivans' boat, meticulously preserved and hidden for nearly 2 decades. Martha's fishing license remained tucked in the glove compartment, and forensic teams discovered minute traces of blood matching both Martha and Ethan. The most disturbing revelation came too late for direct answers. Howard Miller had died of liver failure 3 months earlier, taking his secrets to the grave and leaving investigators with a boat, but no explanation for its presence in his garage. FBI agents swarmed around the boat, their movements deliberate and methodical as they documented every inch of the Sullivans' vessel. Tom stood at the edge of the garage, his face ashen, as he watched them collect blood samples from the floor where Martha and Ethan had once sat. The discovery transformed the investigation overnight, breathing new life into a case that had haunted Cedar Falls for nearly 2 decades. "We're treating this as a potential homicide investigation now," Agent Catherine Reeves explained to Tom as they sat in a makeshift command center near Miller's foreclosed property. Her steady gaze conveyed both competence and compassion. "The Bureau is establishing a task force focused specifically on Howard Miller's background and his connections to your family." Within days, the investigation uncovered disturbing financial patterns. Miller's bank records revealed monthly payments of $2,500 to an offshore account beginning shortly after Jack Sullivan's death and ending abruptly on May 3, 1993, the day before Martha and Ethan disappeared. "We believe Jack Sullivan may have been involved in diverting prescription medications," Reeves explained during a difficult briefing in her office. Spread across the table were employment records showing Jack and Howard had briefly worked together at a pharmaceutical distribution company in the late 1980s. Tom shook his head vehemently. "That can't be right. Jack was a pharmaceutical sales rep. He was ordinary." Yet as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a complex web of connections. A hidden compartment in the recovered boat contained $43,000 in cash and a collection of identification documents bearing Martha's photograph, but different names, the same ones Tom had discovered under her mattress 5 years earlier. Similar documents for Ethan under the names Daniel Pierce, David Lambert, and Eric Dawson suggested preparation for multiple possible identities. The evidence increasingly pointed toward a planned disappearance rather than a tragic accident. The investigation took another turn when Miller's ex-wife, Barbara, revealed during questioning that Howard had disappeared for 3 days immediately after the Sullivans vanished. When he returned, he had been unusually flush with cash and nervous, cleaning out their garage to make room for what he called a project. Howard wasn't a violent man, Barbara told investigators, twisting a tissue between her fingers. But he was scared of something or someone. After the Sullivans disappeared, he would check the locks 3 times every night and started drinking heavily. The 19th anniversary of the disappearance brought media attention back to Cedar Falls. Nancy Grace featured the case on her show, focusing on the newly discovered evidence suggesting Martha and Ethan might have fled rather than drowned. Online forums exploded with theories, some accusing Martha of killing Jack for insurance money, others suggesting all 3 Sullivans had been victims of a drug cartel's retribution. Through facial recognition software, the FBI identified a woman resembling an aged Martha Sullivan in security footage from a medical clinic in Tucson, Arizona. The woman, using the name Ellen Pierce, worked as a nurse practitioner and matched Martha's height, build, and distinctive mannerisms. Tom, now approaching 60 with gray hair and deep lines etched into his once youthful face, stared at the grainy image on Agent Reeves's tablet. "That's her eyes," he whispered, his voice catching. Martha always had this way of tilting her head when she was listening carefully. The FBI established surveillance on the clinic while investigating Ellen Pierce's background. The credentials checked out perfectly: nursing license, tax records, rental history, all establishing a 19-year presence in Arizona. Yet before 1993, Ellen Pierce didn't exist. Deeper investigation revealed Daniel Pierce, supposedly Ellen's son, teaching biology at Pima Community College. His academic credentials traced back to the University of Arizona, where he'd received his master's degree in 2001, but like his mother, his existence began only after the Sullivans vanished. As agents prepared to make contact, Tom insisted on accompanying them to Arizona, despite warnings about potential danger or emotional trauma. "I've lived with ghosts for 19 years, he told Reeves, determination hardening his voice. "I need to face whatever truth is waiting." The night before their planned approach, surveillance captured Ellen and Daniel Pierce meeting at a small house on the outskirts of Tucson. Through the windows, agents observed an emotional conversation, with Daniel appearing agitated and Ellen repeatedly shaking her head. At 10:43 p.m., they emerged with packed suitcases, loading them into separate vehicles. "They know we're watching," Reeves said, ordering immediate interception before they could flee again. The FBI intercepted Ellen and Daniel Pierce at a gas station 20 miles outside Tucson. Agents in tactical gear surrounded their vehicles with practiced efficiency, weapons drawn, but not aimed directly at the suspects. Despite 19 years of living under assumed identities, Martha Sullivan's first words upon seeing her brother emerging from an FBI vehicle were simply, "Oh, Tommy, you never gave up." Tom stood frozen, unable to move as he stared at his sister, older, her hair now streaked with silver, but unmistakably Martha. When he finally approached her, his footsteps felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath him might dissolve at any moment. In the sterile interview room of the Tucson FBI field office, Martha sat with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of water. Agent Reeves recorded the session, while Tom sat silently in the corner, still processing that the ghosts he'd chased for nearly 2 decades were flesh and blood. "After Jack's unexpected death in '90, Martha began, her voice steadier than her trembling hands, "I discovered hidden financial records in a compartment beneath our bedroom floor. They indicated his involvement in a prescription drug diversion scheme with his employer, facilitated by Howard Miller." She explained how Jack had been skimming medications and selling them to a distribution network operating throughout New England. "Jack told me he was building our retirement fund," Martha continued, tears finally breaking through her composed facade. "I didn't ask questions when extra money appeared. After he died, men came to the house asking about missing product and money Jack supposedly had. These men, representatives of the distribution network, made it clear they believed Jack had hidden away significant cash and product before his death. When Martha couldn't produce either, they threatened Ethan directly. One night I found a man standing in Ethan's bedroom, just watching him sleep," Martha said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He said, 'Kids have accidents all the time.' I knew then we couldn't stay." Desperate and terrified, Martha had approached Howard Miller, the only person who understood the danger they faced. Miller, racked with guilt over involving Jack in the operation, agreed to help them disappear in exchange for a portion of the $120,000 Martha had found hidden in their attic insulation. "We staged everything," she admitted. "Howard took our boat after we drove away. He put the thermos in the lake as a false lead. We had IDs prepared and drove straight through to Arizona." For Ethan, now Daniel, the revelation of his mother's deception had come only gradually over the years. "She told me we were leaving because of Dad's enemies," he explained, now a bearded man of 37 with his father's eyes and his mother's quiet intensity. "I didn't know we were leaving forever until we were already in Arizona. By then, what choice did I have?" The federal prosecutor determined that the statute of limitations had expired on any charges related to the false identities or Martha's knowledge of Jack's criminal activities. The drug distribution network had been dismantled years earlier in an unrelated DEA operation, removing any lingering threat to the Sullivans. 3 weeks later, Martha and Ethan Sullivan returned to Cedar Falls for the first time in nearly 2 decades. The small airport terminal filled with former neighbors, Ethan's classmates, and reporters as they emerged from the arrival gate. Tom embraced his sister fiercely, whispering 19 years through tears. The homecoming revealed complicated emotions throughout the community. Some welcomed them with open arms, understanding Martha's desperate choice to protect her son. Others felt betrayed by the deception that had left them grieving unnecessarily for years. "You let us drag the lake for months," Ray Hoffman, the former dockmaster, said during a tense community meeting at the town hall. "We held memorial services. We grieved for you." Martha stood to face her former friends and neighbors. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "Every year on the anniversary, I lit candles for the people I left behind. I knew what it was costing you, and I hated myself for it. But faced with the same choice, Ethan's safety or your peace of mind, I would make the same decision again." While Martha is welcomed back to the community with mixed reactions of relief and betrayal, a man discreetly observes the scene from across the airport terminal, making a phone call. "You were right. Sullivan's back, and she still might know where Jack hid the rest." The man watching Martha from across the terminal slipped away before Tom could notice him, vanishing into the crowd like a shadow retreating from sunlight. Martha felt a familiar unease settle between her shoulder blades, but forced herself to focus on the moment. She was home, finally home. The following morning, Martha stood before her old house, now owned by the Peterson family. The white colonial looked smaller than she remembered, its blue shutters replaced with green ones, the massive oak in the front yard now sporting a tire swing where Ethan's rope ladder had once hung. She studied the changes, cataloging each difference like a scientist examining an altered specimen. "They added a sunroom in the back," Tom said, standing beside her, "and the garden's gone. Mrs. Peterson doesn't have your green thumb." Martha nodded silently, transfixed by this physical manifestation of time's passage, a home that had continued without her, just as Cedar Falls had. 3 days later, the town hall meeting turned contentious as Martha faced her former community. Ray Hoffman's weathered face contorted with anger as he leaned on his cane. "You let us drag the lake for months," he said, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "We held memorial services. We grieved for you." Several others nodded in agreement, the hurt evident in their eyes. Martha rose slowly from her seat, shoulders squared despite her trembling hands. "I'm sorry for the pain I caused," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Every year on the anniversary, I lit candles for the people I left behind. I knew what it was costing you, and I hated myself for it. But faced with the same choice, Ethan's safety or your peace of mind, I would make the same decision again." The following week, Tom showed Martha the small property he'd purchased on the outskirts of town, a modest main house with a newly renovated guest cottage tucked behind a stand of maples. "It's not much," he said, handing her the key to the cottage, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." That evening, Martha walked alone along the lakeshore as sunset painted the water in golds and crimsons. She knelt at the edge, letting the gentle waves lap at her fingertips. The familiar chill of Champlain's waters triggered a flood of memories. Early mornings with Ethan, the rhythmic casting of lines, laughter echoing across the surface. Across town, Ethan was packing his Arizona apartment, explaining his situation to bewildered colleagues at Pima Community College. He'd taken a leave of absence, promising to return to finish the semester, though in his heart he was already planning his permanent move back to Vermont. "My mother needs me," he told his department chair, the words sounding strange after years of being Daniel Pierce, son of Ellen. The following morning, Martha ventured into town, drawing stares as she entered the local cafe. The room hushed momentarily before conversations resumed at a lower volume. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes as she ordered coffee, some gazes welcoming, others accusatory. Later that afternoon, Martha visited Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital where she'd once worked as a nurse. Only 2 staff members remained from her time, Nancy in billing and Dr. Friedman, now the chief of medicine. They embraced her with genuine warmth, offering a connection to her past life that felt both comforting and disorienting. The next day brought Martha to the cemetery, where Jack's headstone stood weathered by 19 Vermont winters. She placed a fishing lure on the smooth granite, one from the tackle box they'd taken on their final trip to the lake. "The hardest part," she confessed to Tom as they walked among the graves, "is knowing that what I did to protect Ethan from Jack's mistakes meant teaching him that sometimes running away is the answer. I saved his life, but damaged his soul." Tom studied his sister's profile, noting how Arizona's sun had aged her differently than Vermont's seasons would have. "You both survived," he said simply. "Everything else can be healed." That evening, Ethan called from Tucson. "When I get back, Mom," he said before hanging up, "think we might try fishing again? I've missed it." While Martha walked along the pier the following morning, reliving memories, she noticed a familiar man watching her from a nearby boat. It was Victor Mercer, one of the men who had threatened Ethan years ago, and he waved to her with a sinister smile that sent chills down her spine. They had found her again. Martha fled from the pier, her heart hammering against her ribs as Victor Mercer's smile burned in her memory. Her hands trembled while fumbling with the cottage door locks, nearly dropping her phone as she dialed Tom's number. "He found me," she gasped when Tom answered. "Victor is here in Cedar Falls." Within minutes, Tom arrived at the cottage, his face ashen. Martha paced the small living room, drawing the curtains closed against imagined watchers. "Victor was the negotiator," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Always polite while making the most terrible threats. He was the one standing in Ethan's bedroom that night." Tom gripped her shoulders gently. "We're not facing this alone this time, Martha. I'm calling Agent Reeves." That night, Martha jolted awake at 3:15, heart racing. A sound had disturbed her sleep, perhaps real, perhaps imagined. Cautiously approaching her front door, she found a fishing lure on the doorstep, identical to the one she'd left on Jack's grave. The message was unmistakable. They were watching her, even here. The following morning, Tom installed security cameras around the property, methodically checking locks and windows. The small cottage transformed into a fortress under his careful attention, though both siblings knew walls alone couldn't keep out the past. At Cedar Falls Airport 3 days later, Martha embraced Ethan fiercely as he emerged from the arrival gate, his face grim with determination. "Maybe you should have stayed there," she whispered, feeling his solid presence beneath her trembling hands. Ethan pulled back, his father's stubborn expression settling over features that had matured in the Arizona sun. "No more running, Mom. We face this together." Agent Reeves arrived the following day, her bureau-issued SUV kicking up dust on the driveway. The kitchen table became command central as she spread photographs across its surface, revealing surveillance images of Victor Mercer meeting 2 unfamiliar men at a Burlington restaurant. "We believe this network was dismantled in 2009, Reeves explained, her voice professional but concerned. "Apparently some elements survived." Martha stared at the photos, recognition dawning slowly. "This man," she said, pointing to a gray-haired figure partially obscured in one image. "He came to our house after Jack died, called himself the accountant." With trembling hands, Martha sketched a crude map on Reeves's notepad. Jack mentioned several storage locations. This was the main one, near the Canadian border. 2 days later, FBI agents investigated an abandoned warehouse based on Martha's information. They found it empty, but noted recent activity: cigarette butts, food wrappers, and tire tracks indicating someone had used the location within weeks. That evening, Martha's phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "The Lake Champlain is beautiful this time of year. We could fish, like old times." The message sent ice through her veins. Tom immediately contacted Sheriff Morris, demanding protection for his sister. "These threats are real," he insisted, slamming his fist on the sheriff's desk. That night, Martha dreamed of Jack, his face sometimes loving, sometimes accusatory. "Why did you involve us in this?" she asked the phantom, waking with tears streaming down her face. The following morning, Martha, Tom, and Ethan gathered around the kitchen table, mugs of untouched coffee growing cold as they discussed their limited options. "We could leave again," Tom suggested reluctantly. "Start somewhere new." Martha shook her head firmly. "No, I can't spend the rest of my life running. It's not fair to either of you. Maybe it's time to face Victor and end this." Ethan reached for her hand. "Whatever we do together." Their discussion continued late into the night, weighing scenarios against risks, until Martha's phone rang shortly after midnight, displaying a blocked number. Her hand shook as she answered, putting the call on speaker. "Amanya, 10 a.m. Victor's smooth voice filled the kitchen. "The red fishing boat at the North Dock. Come alone. Bring the information about Jack's stash, or I'll start eliminating your new family one by one, beginning with your dear brother Tommy." Martha's hands trembled as she placed the phone down, Victor's threat hanging in the air like poison. Agent Reeves arrived at the cottage within 30 minutes, her expression grim as she outlined their limited options. "We can put you in protective custody," Reeves said, "or we can use this opportunity to bring Victor in." "He'll just send someone else," Martha replied, her voice steadier than her hands. "This ends now." At 7 the next morning, Martha sat in an improvised FBI operations room as technicians installed a nearly invisible transmitter in the collar of her green fishing jacket. The device, smaller than a shirt button, would capture everything within a 15-foot radius. "Keep him talking," Reeves instructed, adjusting the microphone placement. "We need him to incriminate himself and reveal who else is involved." Tom paced nervously, his face drawn with worry. "This is too dangerous. We should just arrest him now." Martha touched her brother's arm. "He's just the tip of the iceberg, Tommy. We need to know who else is involved or we'll never be safe." The plan was meticulously outlined. Martha would meet Victor alone as demanded, while FBI agents positioned themselves discreetly around the marina. Snipers would maintain visual contact from concealed positions, and a team of agents disguised as fishermen would monitor from a nearby boat. At 9:55, Martha walked slowly along the weathered planks of the North Dock. Her breath fogged in the cool morning air as she spotted the red fishing boat bobbing gently in the water. Victor Mercer stood in the stern, his expensive leather jacket incongruous against the simple vessel's peeling paint. Martha paused, touching her collar briefly to confirm the transmitter was in place, then stepped onto the boat with as much composure as she could muster. "Martha Sullivan," Victor smiled, his teeth unnaturally white against his tanned skin. "Or should I say Ellen Pierce? You've hardly aged." Martha said nothing as Victor guided the boat away from the dock, the small outboard motor putting distance between them and shore with alarming speed. 19 years is a long time to hold a grudge," Martha finally said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Victor navigated toward the center of the lake, away from the populated shoreline. "This isn't personal, Martha. It's business. Jack took products worth over $1 million before his unfortunate heart attack. Our investors still want their money back." In the surveillance van parked near the marina, Reeves and Tom listened intently, technicians recording every word as agents tracked the boat's movement. "I don't have what you're looking for," Martha said, noting with growing alarm that Victor was steering toward a remote section of the lake. "I think you always knew where Jack hid everything," Victor replied, his pleasant tone belying the menace in his words. "Why else would you run so suddenly?" "I ran because you threatened my son," Martha shot back, anger momentarily overcoming her fear. Victor's eyes narrowed as he noticed a boat approaching, 2 men in fishing gear, rods cast in the water. Something about their positioning triggered his suspicion. "You brought the FBI," he hissed, reaching inside his jacket and producing a handgun. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Martha, pressing the weapon against her ribs. "You stupid woman!" "Federal agents, drop your weapon!" came a shout from the approaching boat as the fishermen, revealed their tactical vests and weapons. Chaos erupted as Victor tried to use Martha as a shield. In the struggle, she managed to push him off balance, sending them both tumbling into the cold water. The shock of submersion loosened Victor's grip on his gun, which disappeared into the depths. As they surfaced, gasping, FBI agents surrounded them. A sharp crack echoed across the water as a sniper on shore fired, hitting Victor in the shoulder. Agents pulled Martha from the water, while others secured the bleeding suspect. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Victor spat as paramedics attended his wound. "The boss will finish all of you. Ask her about Howard Miller. Ask her about what really happened to Jack." Victor's words hung in the air as paramedics loaded him into an ambulance. Martha, wrapped in a thermal blanket, couldn't stop shivering despite the warm spring morning. Agent Reeves approached cautiously, her expression a careful mask of professional concern. "Martha, we need to talk about what Victor said," Reeves said quietly. "What did he mean about Jack and Howard Miller?" Before Martha could respond, Tom and Ethan rushed toward her, their faces etched with relief and concern. They embraced her tightly, momentarily creating a protective barrier between Martha and the agent's probing questions. 2 hours later, Martha sat rigidly in the FBI field office's interview room, her still damp clothes replaced with a bureau sweatsuit. The room's sterile environment felt oppressive as she faced Reeves across the metal table. "There are things I never told anyone," Martha said, her voice barely audible. "Not even you, Tommy." She glanced at her brother, who sat in the corner, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. "I started suspecting Jack's death wasn't natural when I found a box of compounded medications in his car the day before he died," Martha continued, each word seeming to physically pain her. "Pills that weren't prescribed to any patient, with labels removed." She described how Jack had become increasingly paranoid in the weeks before his death, checking windows and jumping at unexpected sounds. "Jack was planning to get us out," she explained, tears finally breaking through her composed facade. "He said he'd made a terrible mistake getting involved with these people." Tom leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his chair. "What exactly are you saying, Martha?" Martha's gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the walls. "The morning Jack died, Howard Miller stopped by for coffee. He found Jack on the floor and called the ambulance." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "3 days later, Howard came to me, warning that the same men were watching me and Ethan now." "You're saying Howard poisoned Jack?" Tom asked, horror dawning on his face. Martha stared at her hands. "I never had proof, but I suspected, and if I'd raised those suspicions, I would have put our lives in even more danger." She looked directly at Ethan. "So, when Howard offered to help us disappear—" "My father was murdered," Ethan said flatly, his face pale with shock. "And you knew this entire time?" "I suspected," Martha corrected, reaching for her son's hand across the table. "But I couldn't prove it. If I'd gone to the police with just suspicions about powerful people, what do you think would have happened?" Reeves slid a photograph across the table, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit. "Do you recognize Lawrence Whitfield, CEO of Whitfield Pharmaceuticals, and our primary suspect for leading this operation?" Martha nodded slowly. "Jack mentioned him once. Said he was a man who smiled while destroying lives." "Whitfield has significant political connections," Reeves explained, her tone grim. "We believe he may have influenced the original investigation into your disappearance." The session continued for hours as Martha reconstructed the entire timeline, connecting dots that had remained separate for nearly 2 decades. When they finally emerged from the interview room, exhaustion had settled into Martha's bones like a physical weight. As Martha, Tom, and Ethan prepared to leave the office, an agent rushed toward Reeves, whispering urgently in her ear. Reeves's expression shifted from professional calm to alarming concern. "What is it?" Tom asked, noticing the change immediately. "Lawrence Whitfield's private jet took off less than an hour ago from Burlington International, headed for the Caribbean," Reeves replied, her voice tight. "And our analysis shows he received a call from someone inside the FBI immediately after we apprehended Victor Mercer." The revelation of an FBI informant sent shockwaves through the Sullivan family. Within hours, they were relocated to a secure safe house outside Burlington, the modest farmhouse surrounded by agents scanning the perimeter with practiced vigilance. "We have a leak," Agent Reeves announced in a secure conference room the following morning. Only 3 trusted agents joined her, each personally vetted. "No one else knows about this meeting." Martha sat quietly as Reeves displayed call logs on a secure laptop. The records showed regular communications between Lawrence Whitfield and the recently retired Sheriff Hayes, along with an unidentified number bearing a Washington, D.C. area code. "The calls to Hayes explain why your original investigation was so thoroughly misdirected," Reeves told Tom, whose face had hardened into a mask of betrayal. Outside in the safe house's backyard, Ethan sat alone on a weathered bench, studying old photographs of his father. The man smiling back from the faded images seemed impossible to reconcile with the criminal Martha had described. Each photo represented a memory now tainted with new context: family fishing trips funded by stolen medications, Christmas presents purchased with blood money. Martha approached cautiously, her footsteps crunching on gravel. "Your father wasn't an evil man, Ethan. He got trapped in something bigger than himself. He put us in danger," Ethan replied bitterly, not looking up. "We lost nearly 20 years of our lives because of his mistakes." Back inside, Tom and Reeves pored over ancient case files, connecting dots that had remained separate for decades. "Hayes consistently discouraged certain lines of investigation," Tom observed, tracing a pattern through his notes. "He always pushed the accident theory, even when evidence suggested otherwise." Reeves nodded grimly. "Whitfield used pharmaceutical representatives like Jack to divert controlled medications. The network distributed across 6 states, with doctors writing fraudulent prescriptions and pharmacists filling them without question." Martha, rejoining them, pointed at a name in the files. "Gregory Pearson. He was a doctor at Cedar Falls Memorial. Always prescribed excessive amounts of painkillers. I reported him once, but nothing came of it." That evening, Martha and Ethan faced a difficult decision as Reeves outlined their options for moving forward. "If you testify, your identities will become public," Reeves explained. "There will be no more Ellen and Daniel Pierce to return to. The media attention will be significant." Sheriff Morris arrived unexpectedly the next morning, causing momentary panic until Reeves confirmed he wasn't connected to any suspicious phone records. "Hayes always told me to leave the Sullivan case alone," Morris admitted, shame evident in his posture. "Now I understand why." Television news broadcasts that afternoon showed the arrests of several doctors and pharmacists across Vermont and neighboring states. The operation was expanding, targeting the infrastructure that had survived for decades. Martha paced the safe house living room, weighing her options. "If I testify, I'll be exposing not just myself, but Ethan too." Ethan watched his mother's troubled movements, seeing for the first time the full weight she had carried alone for nearly 2 decades. The woman who had taught biology as Ellen Pierce in Arizona had always seemed confident, but Martha Sullivan carried visible burdens. "We can't keep running, Mom," Ethan finally said, his voice steady. "It's time to face this completely. I'll testify if you testify." Martha stopped pacing, studying her son's face, Jack's determination reflected in his eyes, but tempered with her own resilience. Before she could respond, Agent Reeves entered the room, her expression grave as she ended a phone call. "Lawrence Whitfield has been found dead on his yacht in the Caribbean," she announced. "Apparent suicide, but a handwritten note found beside his body contains only 5 disturbing words. Martha Sullivan knows where it is. Martha Sullivan knows where it is." Agent Reeves placed the evidence photo of Whitfield's note on the table, its implications hanging heavy in the safe house air. The meticulous handwriting seemed at odds with the supposed suicide scenario. "This wasn't suicide," Reeves confirmed after reviewing the preliminary forensic report. "The angle of the gunshot wound is inconsistent with self-infliction. He was murdered to silence him." Martha stared at the note, her expression shifting from confusion to sudden clarity. "Jack's insurance policy," she whispered. "He always called it his treasure at the bottom of the lake." The following morning, a small FBI team assembled at a secluded section of Lake Champlain's shoreline. The early fog blanketed the water, creating an ethereal landscape as Martha directed them toward a distinctive oak tree with a lightning scar running down its trunk. "Here," Martha indicated, pointing to a spot approximately 6 feet from the tree's base. "Jack brought me here once, made me memorize the location. Said if anything ever happened to him, everything I needed would be waiting." 2 agents began carefully excavating the area while Reeves stood beside Martha, both women watching intently as shovels cut through the earth. Nearly 2 feet down, a metallic scrape signaled discovery, a waterproof metal case, roughly the size of a small suitcase. The team gathered as Reeves pried open the case, revealing meticulously organized folders, USB drives, and micro-cassette recordings. Jack Sullivan had documented everything: names, dates, transactions, photographs of meetings between Whitfield and various officials, including former Sheriff Hayes. "He knew he was in danger," Martha said, her fingers trembling as she touched the evidence her husband had compiled. "He was gathering this to protect us." Agent Reeves examined the documents with growing amazement. "This implicates dozens of people: doctors, pharmacists, distributors, law enforcement. Jack documented the entire operation." Within 24 hours, arrests began across 5 states. News broadcasts showed the former Sheriff Hayes being led away in handcuffs, along with 3 FBI agents, including one from Reeves's own office. The physician who had signed Jack's death certificate was taken into custody for falsifying medical records. 3 days later, Martha, Ethan, and Tom sat on a bench overlooking the lake, sharing a comfortable silence as the sunset painted the water in shades of amber and gold. The immediate danger had passed, replaced by the quieter challenge of rebuilding their interrupted lives. "I accepted the position at Burlington," Ethan announced, breaking the silence. "I start next semester." Martha smiled, genuine happiness lighting her features for the first time in weeks. "That's wonderful, honey." The following week, Martha visited Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital, meeting with the current director about returning to nursing. "We could use someone with your experience," he told her, "whenever you're ready." Meanwhile, Tom spent an afternoon dismantling the investigation wall in his basement. Each pinned article and photograph represented years of his life dedicated to finding Martha and Ethan. As he carefully packed away the materials, he felt simultaneously lightened and strangely untethered without his mission. On a crisp autumn morning, Martha stood before Jack's grave, the cemetery quiet except for distant birdsong. "You tried to protect us in your way," she said softly. "I understand now." 2 weeks later, Martha and Ethan took a small rented boat onto Lake Champlain. Martha wore her green fishing jacket, now mended where the FBI transmitter had been removed. They cast their lines into the water, the familiar motions bridging the years between their past and present. As the boat rocked gently on the water, Martha handed Ethan a small box. "I found this among the things the FBI returned," she said. Inside was a pocket watch that had belonged to Jack. When Ethan opened it, he discovered a photo of the 3 of them and an engraved message he'd never seen before. "For my son, time lost cannot be recovered, but the time ahead is still yours."